You're looking for a marketer first, someone who's curious, someone who gets inside your customer's mindset, someone who thinks about your customer's journey. I'm a stickler for a really good brief. Like, I'm the guy who will screenshot a poor brief and slack it to you and go, what exactly are you asking for here? Because I've got no idea. I've been doing this a long time and this brief makes no sense to me. Australians don't like to get sold to, for a start.
Yeah.
And if you're going to sell to them, they are very skeptical. Face-to-face is a game changer. Like, so much more trust, but it does require a lot more legwork.
Welcome back to another episode of Revenue Mechanics, where again, we're jumping under the hood of revenue engines with revenue leaders from around the world. And today I have with me Russ Macumber, who coincidentally, I don't know if you knew this, Russ, but we almost worked together not too long ago, many years ago. We'll get into that story at some stage. But Russ, great to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here, Sam. Thank you.
Awesome. So for anyone that doesn't know Russ, he's the founder of Impressive USA and one of the leading digital agencies over in the States. And the reason I wanted to get Russ on the show quite early into our time running this was for a selfish reason, because I know from recommendations, Russ is one of the best team builders when it comes to digital execution and digital marketing. So I wanted to start off just by getting your thoughts on what you're seeing in the marketplace with whether it's companies or agencies, etc., with the struggles they're facing when it comes to actually securing and building up good talent within their organizations.
Yeah, cool. Well, I guess I've got a pretty broad view on this because I've built and managed and been involved in lots of team building and company building in Australia, and then now over the other side of the pond here in Texas in the US. So a lot of the challenges are similar, but in a lot of ways they're different because the markets are very different and the way that the workforce is structured is quite different. I think for the Australian audience listening to this now, when you're building a team, there's different like aspects to it that you take for granted that are not so over here. Like, just as an example, it's a lot more centralized in Australia. You've got Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane to a lesser extent, Perth to a lesser extent, Adelaide to a lesser extent. You've got just a really small handful of core markets. And if we're thinking about marketers, right, building marketing teams, what do marketers want to work with? They want to work really good marketers as they start to grow. They want to work with big brands that people know.
Yep.
Good budget. Most of those big brands and good budgets they're in the big cities. So it's an interesting situation where if you are in Melbourne or you are in Sydney, you've got an inherent advantage, especially if you've got a face-to-face culture as opposed to a remote culture, which is another difference between Australia and the US in terms of how far along each country is. I shouldn't even say how far along, just how much more comfortable the different countries are based on the structure of their workforce currently.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So when it comes to digital, because obviously there's a lot of misconceptions with the power of what digital marketing can do for a business. There's businesses that oversell it, undersell it, everything in between. When it comes to recruiting good talent digitally, whether a company's hiring internally or even looking to outsource to an agency, what are some of the things and characteristics they need to look for and understand before even considering taking that step?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so a company looking to hire some form of digital talent. The first thing I would say is like what you're looking for. I find lots of people get really stuck on the technical and the targeting, and they're looking for data nerds who would live their whole day in spreadsheets and writing code and things like that. Like, those are great strengths to have, and I've got lots of great friends who do those things, but I'm a firm believer that you're looking for a marketer first, someone who's curious, someone who gets inside your customer's mindset, someone who thinks about your customer's journey. And that's the starting point to then overlay with your technical and your targeting and all the other things that you can do within that platform, all the other things that you can do within different softwares to try to get to that person. But especially over the last few years, you have a lot of really technical marketers who are great when it comes to, I've worked with lots of them, where from setting up a tracking campaign or restructuring an ad account, all these different things, they're wonderful. But how often do they actually do that with the thought of the customer right now is at this place and here is how I'm going to reach them, how the timing's going to work, here's the method, the format, the creative. So I'd be asking questions. So if I'm back on that original question of what to look for in digital talent. Like I'd be asking more around. Tell me about your interest in marketing. Tell me about how you first got into this. Tell me about the first ad that you saw growing up. What was it that made it stick in your mind? Tell me about a jingle that you heard that stuck in your mind. Why did that stick in your mind? And just get an understanding of, are they actually a marketer first, or are they someone who's just fallen back into it? There's in the late 20 teens, I know what you call it, 2010s, there was lots of, I remember there was a number out there of like math majors and statisticians who were getting into big data and those sorts of things and backing into marketing from that perspective, which is great. And it's a lot of very clever talent coming into our space, but they weren't marketers.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for someone who is a marketer first and then a digital native second, not a distant second, but second.
Yeah, I think that's something I've observed as well in terms of the misconflation of like someone that can press the right buttons and knows where to click versus someone who's a
Mm,
marketer. And I think for companies, whether again they're outsourcing to a freelancer, an agency, contractor, hiring in house, they need to understand that difference of just because someone knows the technical aspect, and maybe they need a technical person to come in and just press
mm,
buttons because they've got the strategy and they've got the marketing element down pat. But if you bring a technical person in for the marketing side and they don't have that marketing expertise, they're going to press all the right buttons and then still nothing's going to change. I think that's an advantage you and I hold, which tying back to when I mentioned we nearly worked together
mm.
back in, must have been 2018, I think, somewhere in 2018. I actually interviewed with Sam McKenna or Sam
Yeah, McCarrow. Yeah, yeah.
McCarrow. Yeah. I ended up taking a freelance sales gig, but I was very close to working at Impressive back
Oh,
in
there you go.
2018, which I think was when you were there.
I was, yeah.
Yeah, so nearly crossed paths earlier on. But
Yep.
I think with our backgrounds in the sales side of understanding, obviously, to be good in sales, you need to understand problems, how to solve problems, how to navigate them, etc., and understand that buying journey. Then, when you take that skill set and that understanding across into marketing and learn the technical aspects, but we're always keeping in mind that buying journey, I think it gives you
Mm.
a bit of a, or it gives you a bit of an advantage.
Well, it gives you a sharper focus because you're a salesperson is whether it's there's a natural part to them that does this, but then over time, as you become better and better at sales, you just get really good on ROI for action.
Mm,
So you're like, I can spend 5 minutes doing this and I know I'm going to get an outsized return, or I can spend an hour doing this, not so much. So when your mind starts to get when you've really built that muscle in your brain,
yeah,
and then you bring that over to other disciplines, in this case marketing, it really gives you just a sharper lens on anything from like copywriting to how long the funnel needs to be to make sure we're getting in front of people. Like it just brings more intention to your actions, and
yeah.
yeah, I think it's a huge advantage,
And when,
frankly.
especially I think with writing ads or even VSLs or, as you said, structuring the funnel and the process, you can look at it through that sales lens of like, would I say that on a call? Would that actually move the
Mm,
needle for someone? Probably
yeah.
not. Take it out. Have you found that, especially since growing obviously your own agency and your own team now, that have you found many marketers that do have that background in sales, or is that a bit of a unicorn thing?
It's not, in my experience, it's not as common as I'd like it to be, frankly. A lot of salespeople go on and build their own agencies and do those things, but they probably do it more so from a there's potentially good money in this and I can hire other people to do the work. But in terms of, I think whether it's a unicorn or not, people who are like a salesperson who can actually get on, who can understand marketing, but can also get in there and write copy and help with targeting and do all those things. That's something that I think is pretty rare, and it's like a superpower in a lot of ways. Like to be able
Yeah.
to have both those skills and bring them together is pretty cool and quite rare.
And I found it quite advantageous for myself personally, especially because obviously now starting this business and running Shapers and
Yep.
going through some of the challenges that I'm sure you've been through 10 times over. In those early days, or even now is still the early days, I've had the
Yeah.
benefit of being able to maintain good margin because I'm able to not only get on calls, close deals, prospect, generate leads, but then do the execution as well, write the copy, run the
Hmm.
ads, get the engine moving for the clients. So I think in terms of the competitiveness of this industry, a lot of people say it's hard to get into now because the margins are so tight, people are so skint on, what they want to pay and stuff like that. But I've been able to leverage that by being able to do more facets of the role. Now I can start hiring out and leveraging other people, but I can do it through the lens of knowing what they should be doing, or at least to a base level, this is what gets
Hmm.
results, versus being like, I'm just a sales guy. You do all the Facebook ads, the marketing, the Google ads, etc. So to bring it back to, I guess, the selfish reason as to why wanted to set up this call and get a little bit of coaching. One of the challenges that I've faced, tying into that point we just made around like my ability to do the execution and the sales, do the whole end to end system. One of the challenges I've
Yep.
found is then having the confidence and, I guess, the courage to outsource that work, because obviously to continue growing, I can't keep doing everything. Otherwise, I'm a glorified
Yep.
freelancer. So when it comes to taking that step of potentially looking at some talent, maybe it's get copywriting done, get media buying done, and start outsourcing. Firstly, how did you go through that process in the early days of Impressive? And then
Hmm.
as an entrepreneur, how did you relinquish that control?
Yep. Cool. So I've been through this with Impressive. I've been through this with a couple of wedding businesses as well that I had with my wife. Um, so where you are the sales talent, the execution, the account management, all of it. And the advantage you've got is because you've been across all of it, like you said, you understand it all from end to end. You've been able to produce consistently good results doing a certain process, documenting that process, which no one likes doing. Oh no, there's people out there apparently who do like doing it, but for the most part, salespeople I can say don't like doing this.
No.
So it's actually putting it down in writing so that when you do want to bring someone in, you've got here you go. Here's a roadmap of how this is done well. How do I know? Because I've been doing exactly this for the last 6 months, and we've done all of these things. So all you need to do is follow this framework. What you want to do though is you want to be able to make sure that there's a couple of parts to this. So there's a lot of parts to this. One thing I'd always start with is the describing the what and not the how. If you get down the into the weeds of describing the how of every little thing, it's going to drive you crazy. And you're also handing over a document to someone who's probably never going to read every little bit. And if they need to understand the how of every step, they're probably not the right person for you anyway, and you shouldn't be giving them to your clients.
Mm,
So the what rather than the how would be like, let's say it's a meta campaign. Let's do it simple one. It's a retargeting campaign, and you're just going to set up website visitor retargeting, right?
yeah.
The how would be the what is there's more than this, but the what would be let's make sure the pixels on there, make sure set a look back window of X amount, which matches the buying cycle of your clients so that you don't retarget them for too long or too short.
Mm,
Use get creative from the client. That might be the what. That might even be a bit more too much detail for the what. But the how would be log into Facebook, do this. Do you know what I mean? That those extra steps are going to drive you nuts in writing that process out.
mhm.
And they're not useful for the right type of staff member you actually want to bring in and trust your clients with.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point. Because that's something I have definitely, as you mentioned, like as a salesperson, and as you alluded to before, like we flex that muscle of like, how can I spend the least amount of time and get the biggest outsized return? And documenting processes and stuff, it always slips me into that mindset of like, I might as well just do it myself because it's going to take me
yeah,
just as long to write this thing that is to just do it. But obviously, it has that longer term benefit in terms of the return that you get if you can do it properly.
well, there is an outsized return. It's just that you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Like if you think about, you mentioned it yourself, like could I be a glorified freelancer or am I going to build like a good size agency that employs people and has a big impact across a range of verticals that I'm interested in? And you can't do that on your own. It is going to take some foundational work of process, which isn't necessarily fun, the process documentation. But there's so many tools out there now. Like when we first started doing it here, we were using Scribe quite a bit, but now you've got ChatGPT and Claude and all these other different tools out there. I've got a tip that I was given by a colleague over here, and he was talking about how he always uses ChatGPT in the audio. So if he needs to map out a process, he just says it. He's like, okay, cool. So step one, I will do this, making sure I've got this and this. Step two, good for salespeople because salespeople don't like necessarily typing everything out, but they do like to talk.
Yeah.
So using ChatGPT potentially to map it all out, have it give you a transcript, and then you can tweak it and you can give it direction on, oh, actually, I'd like this broken into 4 sections. I'd like it less than 200 words per section. And I'd like some links to relevant resources that the person could use along the way. Boom. It's going to iterate and actually help build that out for you in a way that was not possible not that long ago.
Yeah, that's definitely something I haven't tapped into. is the power, especially with process creation, leveraging AI as much. That's something I need to build into my workflow as well. To shift a bit to the negative side as well,
Mm.
from obviously building multiple businesses now, what are some of the roadblocks or hurdles that you faced or mistakes you've made that you would say don't do this ever again?
Yeah, and this is definitely coloured by my experience over here, where the what's the word I'm looking for? The industrial relations space. It's just different here. But that said, even in Australia, I'd still follow the same advice. Like, don't go hiring full time people early on. You
Mm,
can get amazing talent, contractor style, as a small business, where you can give them processes, you can get them onboarded, doing good work. Potentially down the road, they become a full time resource. But if you think about, especially in Australia, when you're talking about once they've worked with you for 3 to 6 months, it's a very tough relationship to not have anymore.
yeah.
And then you've got benefits and on costs, super, and everything else. So definitely look for contractor resources. Think about whether they need to be in person or if they could be remote. That's going to open up a massively bigger talent pool for you. That was a big change we made here
Mm,
with the US agency. We
yeah.
went from being Austin only, and it was full time in office, and it very quickly turned to hybrid in office. And then eventually it became, I just couldn't get people into the office. And eventually we became full remote. So we've got a handful of staff here, and we've got staff throughout North America. But these are,
Mm,
decisions that will obviously impact where you want to get the talent from. In Melbourne, obviously there's lots of talent there, but then again, you're protecting your margins. So
yeah.
there's there's really clever people who are not necessarily in Melbourne who could do the work at a really high level.
Yeah, and obviously the remote versus in office is a hot debate that flies around online all the time, especially since COVID.
Mm.
When it comes to recruiting remote talent, obviously, because you don't have the benefit of them sitting next to you and being able to watch you do things, et cetera, et cetera. How have you found integrating remote talent into the company and still getting like maximum output from them?
Yeah, those processes are key. So if you haven't got a process that you can point them back towards, that why aren't you doing it this way? Why would they do it that way? They'll do
Mm,
it their own way. So that's, again, we come back to those documented processes. That's going to be one way. Whether it's collaboration hours where you make sure your whole team. So I'll give you an example here. We're through North America, South America, India, Bangladesh, England, Australia. We're all over this for this US agency, mostly here in North America though.
mm,
But we have a collaboration window of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central time,
yeah.
where if you work with us, you're available in that time. So then in terms of collaborating and getting that feedback and getting that kind of more instant communication and responsive, more interactive learning, that collaboration time has been really crucial. So I would, if you're going to do that remote thing, we've made a mistake of going, oh, well, if they work overnight and we work during the day, we can brief them in, we'll get in the next day, we'll have a nice sleep, wake up, and there'll be amazing, beautiful work there. But of
Okay.
course, it doesn't work like that.
Yep.
The brief could be just a tiny bit off, the output is completely wrong, and all of a sudden you're a day, 2 days, 3 days behind. So
Mhm.
the overlap time for remote teams is, if not the most important, it's up there with the most important things to think about.
Yeah, and on that point as well, because I've got a few remote workers or remote contractors now that I'm
Mm,
leveraging, but I'm looking at it right now as more of a learning process in terms because I know I don't have my processes down pat in terms of my communication to them to get the best out of
mm.
them. So happy to make the investment upfront to force myself to go through that learning process. When it comes to briefing out and making sure the communication lines are clear, et cetera, especially with remote workers, are there any tools, processes, or resources that you found extremely useful to make those lines of communication open?
Yeah, I mean, the ones I'll suggest are not like revolutionary. It's the stuff everyone uses, but it's more about the consistency and discipline in
Mm,
using them well. But we use Asana for project management. I'm a big fan of forms where possible. So if there's a particular type of task you're going to brief out, there's usually standard asks
yeah.
within that type of task. So compulsory field forms so that it cannot be an incomplete brief are going to be really important. And then Looms can be really helpful if you need to provide more context and you're not going to get a chance to necessarily speak to them, or you need to get it logged into your project management system, whether it's Trello or Asana or Monday or whatever it is. A Loom could be helpful as well, but it can depend. I know with some of our contractors, they find my accent just way too thick. So Loom's not super helpful. But I'm trying to think what else from a briefing perspective. I'm a stickler for a really good brief. Like I'm the guy who will screenshot a poor brief and slack it to you and go, what exactly are you asking for here? Because I've got no idea. I've been doing this a long time and this brief makes no sense to me. So I've got no idea how you expect the person at the other end
To know
to
what.
actually come back with good output. They're just going to come back with questions. You're going to answer those questions. All
Mm,
of a sudden, we're a week, 2 weeks in, nothing's been done because you buggered up the brief at the start.
yeah, yeah, and that's again, it's one of the challenges I face in terms of tying back to that mindset of I know what I'm doing, so I know how it sounds. But then I guess that's like the sales communication, and it's obviously a skill of communication as well as to being able to take those ideas and express across, which is definitely an area that I'm trying to lean into more so at the moment.
Yep.
Going upstream when it comes to like that next stage past, like, okay, you've got the deliverables down pat, you've got some good solid team members that are helping you produce for clients, and now as the leader of the company, you're looking to take that potentially next step up and maybe get someone to take over the sales or take over client communications. How have you found that step as a CEO and trusting someone else to be the core communicator with clients as opposed to yourself?
Yeah, it's for me, like it's been a journey and we've had some false steps along the way. Accountability charts or swim lanes, like these are really important things for your people within your business to have authority and ownership over a certain set of responsibilities.
Mm,
And you're never going to be able to step out of think about it. If we think about what you mentioned earlier, and I've been a solopreneur a number of times where you are everything. You're accounts person, you're this, you're wearing all these different hats, and then you start giving the hats to other people so that you can do the stuff that you're really great at. On that note, because sales is what I'm great at, so I can't imagine ever giving sales fully over to someone else. I'm always going to be doing some of it,
mm,
but there's other things I'm good at but not great at.
yeah,
I'm quite good with the books and with the finance and bookkeeping and a bit of finance strategy. I'm quite good. There's people out there better and there's people out there quicker
yeah.
than me at it. So giving ownership, giving people support and development that they need to own their lanes is crucial for you to scale. If you are still wearing the hat as the captain of a different lane in your business, it's going to be really hard for you to actually just narrow down on your superpower and what you do best. A founder led business is going to hit a ceiling really early on if the founder doesn't have other people around them to support them to let them do what they do best, whether it's sales or product or marketing or whatever it happens to be.
Mm, and have you found when starting to hand those hats off to potential leaders to say lead a department or lead a particular vertical, have you
Mm.
found it easier, say you bring a contractor on and then gradually move them to full time and then and then if they've got the right qualities, then go put them into a leadership position, or are you actively outsourcing experience or recruiting experienced leaders into those positions that based on their experience should already be able to do the job?
Yeah, now we've gone the first route that you said then. So they've either been contractors or they've been full time staff that we've brought on, and then I've developed. Like I take, I'm like very finicky when it comes to training people to do things a certain way. So the idea of bringing someone into the business, especially when we're early, who probably has a lot of great experience, but
Mm,
might come with a very set way of doing things. That's not been something I've wanted to do. I've wanted to really just groom talent. So our operations manager, for example, came on. She came out of, well, she's operations director now. She's been promoted a couple of times, but she came on straight out of college, 3 and something years ago. First full time job out of college. Very smart young lady, and she's tried a bunch of different things within the business. Moved her way up from project management to operations director, and she won the Global Agency Awards Rising Star Award earlier this year, which is for me that's like the pinnacle of helping
achievement.
people grow into something within this company that you could win an award like that.
That's awesome. And I imagine for you, obviously, being the facilitator of that growth journey, also just as rewarding as well to see your team win those sort of awards as well. Taking it into a bit of a different direction, as I've always been curious in this, and I haven't had it 100% validated, but I think since you've played in the US market and the Australian market, you're probably the best person to ask. about
Mm.
some of the core differences, as I find that a lot of the time companies in Australia, whether small, medium, large, etc., when they try and adopt US based strategies, can sometimes fail because a lot of US based strategies are based around volume, and Australia's population is obviously quite a lot smaller. What are some of the core differences you found between the two markets in terms of how you sell, how you approach business, and then how you deliver for clients as well?
Yeah, there's a few things to unpack there, but the scale of the US is, you think about like Australia and the US, right? So 30 million, 360, 80 million, whatever. So it's like 12 times the
Mm.
size. But it's more than 12 times the market. Like it's just considerably more. So the whole scale situation, when you try to make those massive scale strategies down into a tiny market like Australia, it's just never going to work. Like here, I could. There's a what do they do? There's a website design firm here locally who only work with Austin-based plumbers. It seems ridiculous,
Yeah.
but it's actually Central Texas-based plumbers. But there is the markets and niches we call them, but the riches are in the niches. That's what they say here. So yeah, in terms of bringing that strategy to Australia, Australia is much more generalist because it's much smaller.
Mm.
So Impressive in Australia works across B2B, B2C, retail, e-com, all sorts of different businesses. I brought that value prop here to the US. Who do you work with? Anyone. What do you do? Everything performance. And it was we needed to narrow it in. Okay, we work with B2C businesses and we only do SEO on paid media. Okay, then you get cut through. And so that was a big difference in just understanding how to position yourself in each market. And just another big difference from here, which I didn't really understand until I got here, was the volume of small and medium sized cities that there
Mm.
are in this country. 100, 500,000 people. Like I couldn't even tell you how many there are, but there's so many that it just means that your local area marketing becomes so much more important because the way someone wants to be communicated to in Round Rock, which is just not far from here, is different to how someone needs to be communicated in San Antonio. Like it's the volume of these smaller cities makes local area marketing much, much different, much more granular,
Yeah.
much more impactful.
And because the reason I asked that is that was my thought process behind it as well. And I had a new client recently, for example, that they're a local gym in Fitzroy. Obviously, you'd know Fitzroy. And they had adopted the gym launch playbook. So, obviously, Alex Hormozy's old company. And that playbook is built around, like, I don't know, I'm sure you've worked with fitness based businesses in your time. It was built
Yeah.
around challenges and plastering the market with challenges to get people in. But obviously, if you tie it back to the buyer's pyramid principle, there's only 10% of a market that are actually considering offers like that. And that marketplace was 11,000, like around Fitzroy, there's about 11,000 population. And then when you
Mm-hmm.
segment that out to men, women, old, young, kids, etc., people who can actually take up a high ticket offer like this, like their market pool was like sub 500. And
Yeah.
when they reached out to me, it was they'd gone through like 6 months of stagnation with that offer. They had an initial burst with it for like 3-4 months where it did well, and then it just
Yeah.
stagnated and died. And when I was looking through the impressions and the reach, etc., in the account, like, well, you've hit like an audience that's maybe 1,000 people 300,000 times in the last 12 months
Oof.
with the same offer.
Yeah.
And it's just a different scope and scale because they were saying, oh, well, that's Gym Launch recommended this. They're doing it with this gym and this gym. And then you go look at the population size of those towns and they're like 150,000, 200,000, etc. Just way
Yep.
different scope. So for Aussies that have maybe adopted some of those American styles and strategies and thought processes and seen them not work in Australia, what recommendations would you have to make some pivots and adjustments to their strategy to really make it work inside the Australian market?
That's a great question. I don't even know if this is more. When you want to work with people who've had success in your country, I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Mm,
Like I'd be trying to read books of. I'll give you an example. What's the Gabrielle? No, they Catch of the Day guys. They've had that book Catch of the Century, I think.
yeah.
But like those guys have built multiple 8, 9 figure online e-commerce brands in Australia. That's the sort of person I'd read that book and really take it to heart. Like there was something in one of the books where they talked about like all of your margin living in your ability as a buyer.
Yep.
So the cheaper I can buy the product, the better my business is. Obvious stuff, but I'd be looking to work with or to follow or to read people who've done really well. To your question of how to do it, it really depends on the industry. It depends on there's going to be some products and some verticals in Australia that have quite a big TAM
Mm.
that you can probably apply some American principles to. So look at the size of your TAM, figure out whether that. Firstly, I'll be trying to follow an Australian blueprint. Secondly, if you're going to follow an American blueprint, look at the size of your TAM and see if there's any relevance to what that blueprint suggests you do.
Yep.
But yeah, in terms of specific advice, it just really depends on the product and on the demand at the time, and yeah, just say case by case.
Yeah, I think it all, as you suggested, then it all ties back to just understanding your personal market, your ICP, who you're dealing
Yep.
with. Even the buying persona is quite different in Australia versus America in terms of how, like, I had a mate who did a thesis on the difference between American and Australian buyers and why American companies tend to fail out here. And he was saying the buying, or in his studies, he came across that the buying persona and the buying type in Australia is much more like Asians, where we're a bit more skeptical. We have a bit more tall poppy syndrome. We're a bit less capitalist supportive.
100%. Australians don't like to get sold to for a start.
Yeah.
And if you're going to sell to them, they are very skeptical. We are very skeptical. I'll give you an example, like from just straight up, like Australia versus America from a selling perspective. I remember, like it's another lifetime ago. In selling to Australians, like in terms of selling a digital marketing service, which is, let's just say it's $5,000 or $10,000 a month. So as an agency fee, right? That process in Australia would be something like an initial discovery, then a deeper discovery, then some form of pretty big proposal, then a follow up, and then an agreement to send an agreement.
Yep.
Like not the agreement itself, but are you okay if I send you an agreement? Yes. And then a follow up on that, and then maybe it closes. And it's over whatever period that might be a week, a month, 6 months, depends on the size of the deal. There's half a dozen steps there. The Americans will put that into one step
Mm.
or two, and that works fine over here because there's such volume and people are just used to it and they don't mind getting sold to. They get what the pitch is about. They get what the discovery is about. So here, I will do a discovery. If it's going well and it's a low yield, I'm going to do discovery, the pitch, and I'm going to send them an agreement right there while I'm on the call. Cool, it's in your inbox now. If you just click on that, we'll get you booked in for your onboarding next week. If I do that in Australia, I'm seen as pushy.
Yep.
Here, it's seen as efficient.
Very different.
That's probably the biggest difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even the scope of, if we choose obviously our industry more as as an example, like I hear say Chris Walker, for example, from Refine Labs talking about like, if you want to work, he sometimes throws off the cuff statements of like companies that want to work with cheap agencies at like 10K a month and don't want to spend the 25,000 a month that they should be spending to get this sort of work done, etc. Like for an Australian company, like excluding sort of the enterprise and high end mid market, 10K a month is still considered a relatively decent retainer over here. Whereas I hear on your side of the world, 10K retainers seem like they're very, very common, and like 20K retainer, etc. So it just seems like the scope and scale of what you're playing with is much larger, and then obviously larger budgets, which gives you more flexibility in the terms of strategy. So it seems like a whole different world. If an Australian company, as a question, was looking to break into the US and venture into the US, what are some tips or advice you would have for them to make that transition?
It probably depends on the type of product, but they depends on the type of product. That said, you'd want to have you need someone on the ground over here. Like
Yeah.
I know a lot of businesses will go, oh no, we'll just set it up virtually, and you don't even need to be there. We can just have fulfillment done there or something. Like if you won't understand your customers as well, their problems, what you're trying to solve, the regional differences, the way phrasing is different in Alabama to here it is in Minnesota to it is in LA, even the propensity to buy. And I mentioned them before around that sales cycle being so much shorter, but it also varies here. In New York, it's much shorter than it is potentially somewhere in the South. So I think either having someone on the ground, an Australian on the ground or an American on the ground who can give you that lay of the land
Yeah.
and be a consistent presence, I think is crucial. Not crucial, I think it's like non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Outside of that, just there's actually a guy here, Derek from Flat Planet, who has only been in Texas for like a month, but he's just doing all the things that I would suggest a business setting up over here do. Like he's getting out, he's on the road to Dallas, to San Antonio, to Houston. He's getting out to networking events. He's just meeting as many people as possible to fast track his understanding of the market and of the buying cycle and of the needs, the product market fit for what he's selling. So and it's like very similar to what I did when I first got here. It's just like get out and shake as many hands as possible.
Mm.
Face to face is like, it's funny because like we say that hybrid and remote is bigger over here, but from a selling perspective, face to face is a game changer. Like it's so much more trust, but it does require a lot more legwork.
100%. That's something that well, for a short period, I was very much, I just want to be remote. I want to work from home and stuff like that. But then when you go out and just shake hands and meet people, especially in sales, things change. And when you're going, I think from an observation, when you're going over into the States, so I've got a few clients in the States as well, each state is almost like its own country in comparison to Australia, as you alluded to then, like they have different buying personas, different personalities, different styles, different how they operate is different. New York, way faster pace than somewhere in the South, for example. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that people need to consider when it not only from the first point of building a team, but when trying to expand and move up. And obviously you've dropped a lot of gold on here. I know we're running short on time and both got to shoot off for our to see the kids. But in terms of the work that Impressive is doing and where you guys are heading, firstly, who do you work with? How do you help them? And then where are you guys heading over the next 12 months?
Yep. So we work with Impressive USA. We work with retail e-commerce brands, so direct-to-consumer brands who transact online. That's one core customer of ours, and the other core customer is multi-location brands at the national franchise or national level. So some of the brands, speaking to the multi-location stuff, one of our clients is Dine Group. So they own Applebee's and IHOP and Fuzzy's Tacos. So we work with them on SEO across their brands. From an e-commerce perspective, fitness industry, given that obviously part of your history. Do you know the brand Precor?
Yep.
Did you see that in gym? Okay, cool. They're one of our clients. Top Fitness is a national retailer that's one of our clients as well. Utah Home Fitness. And then we've got a range of other products. Corksicle, which is a drinkware product, which I haven't got one here right now. But yeah, retail and multi-location businesses. And we're SEO and paid media is what we do. From a next 12 months perspective, we're still early in. We're 3 years in. We've doubled in growth year after year. We won't double this year because it gets harder to double as you get bigger and bigger. But just hoping to keep on working with bigger clients and bigger, just like I was saying earlier about marketers. I'm a marketer. I want to work with fun brands that I like, that I understand the customer, that I've got some good budget to work with, to be curious and run some cool experiments and keep challenging my team.
Yeah, awesome. And for anyone that wants to follow you on that journey, where are the best places to find you and Impressive as well?
Yeah, cool. Just hit me up on LinkedIn, Russ Macumber. And then in terms of like working with us or just understanding the site, it's impressivedigital.com.
Awesome. Cool, Russ. Well, thanks for jumping on today. I know we've tried a couple of times to find a time that aligns to both of us, but finally good to catch up, and I'm sure we'll do it again sometime.
Cool. Thanks, Sam.